Hey guys, welcome back to the channel McNallie Money, home of all things stock, investment, and personal finance related. Now for today's video, we're going to be covering a brand new penny stock on the channel. The company name is Awakn Life Sciences, and similar to some of the others we've talked about in this space, this is a biotech company that's really focused on finding innovative and unique ways to use psychedelics to treat disorders related to mental health and addiction. So this company has a ton of exciting things coming down the pipe. They operate clinics in Europe right now, and they've got very aggressive growth plans over the next couple of years. Now with that being said, before we get into the video, please take a second, hit the like button, you guys. It's a huge help to myself and the channel. If you're not already subscribed, McNallie Money, feel free to do so. And let me know in the comments section below if you've heard of Awakn, if you're currently holding shares, and how you think they stack up to some of the other competitors in this space. Now with that being said, let's get into today's video. Okay guys, so that's right. Today's video, we're going to be covering Awakn Life Sciences Corp. Now I came across this company. I was actually researching some top penny stock articles for the upcoming year of 2022. Awakn was one that I found in a number of articles. I started digging into this one. We've covered a number of these type of companies on the channel previously. This one's got a little bit different twist to it. They're very far along in their clinical trials, so I think that definitely does separate them from some of the others we've reviewed on the channel. They're focused on operations in Europe, so that's another difference here. And Awakn, like some of those other companies, is really a biotechnology company that's focused on finding alternative psychedelic treatments to things such as addiction and mental health. So Awakn trades under the ticker symbol AWKN on the NEO exchange here in Canada. They also trade on the OTC in the US under the ticker symbol AWKNF. And as you can see, they had a very strong session on Friday here. They were up just about 7% per share. So this is as of close Friday, January 7th. They closed out the session at $2.85 Canadian. So they were up 18 cents on the day. And that gives them a market cap right in the range of about $70 to $80 million. So again, compared to a lot of the other companies we've talked about on the channel, like Field Trip Health, MindMed, for example, this one definitely is smaller in terms of market cap, which was really surprising to me considering how far along in their journey they are in terms of their clinical trials. Now we're also going to talk about their deployment or their rollout strategy in terms of their brick and mortar clinics later in today's presentation, and we're going to be doing a deep dive into their investor deck to really get a good understanding of the business, how they've differentiated themselves from the competitors in this space, and their plans for growth over the next couple of years. Now before we get into all that, I did want to quickly bring up their financial results for the third quarter of 2021. So this article came out on December 15th, and a couple things I wanted to specifically call out here. So essentially this company is pre-revenue. If you go down to the key financial highlights, you can see they've got approximately $6 million in cash on the balance sheet. They've got no debt whatsoever, so that's phenomenal as an investor in some of these smaller micro-cap companies. The other thing I wanted to call out here, a very tightly held float, you guys. There's only 25 million shares outstanding, and about a quarter of those are actually held by insiders within the company. And another pretty significant milestone here, they actually achieved their first revenue, so $32,000 via their Awakn Oslo location or facility. So not a ton, but again, compared to nothing in the prior year, they are now starting to see some top line revenue flow into the business. But for argument's sake, this really is a pre-revenue company at this point in time. Now, if we jump over to the Awakn Life Sciences Corporation website, we go into the Investor Relations tab. This really does give a good summary about what the company's focus or mission statement is. So Awakn Life Sciences, again, is a biotechnology company with clinical operations, developing and delivering psychedelic therapeutics, both medicines and therapies, to better treat addiction. So the key or the main focal point of this company at this point in time is treating addiction. And we're going to look at some numbers related to that in a couple of slides here. So addiction, whether we're talking substance abuse or actual behavioral addiction really is becoming one of the most common concerns across the world right now, especially in light of the pandemic, which has really pushed a lot of people into situations that are not ideal. Awakn's team consists of world-leading chemists, scientists, psychiatrists, and psychologists, that's a mouthful to say, who are developing and advancing the next generation of psychedelic drugs, therapies, and enabling technologies to treat addiction. Awakn will deliver these evidence-backed psychedelic therapies in clinics in the United Kingdom and Europe and through licensing partnerships globally. So we're actually going to look at their delivery forecast over the next couple of years on the next slide here, but they really are looking to approach the market in a unique way and really take advantage of that global opportunity. And that's a perfect segue to this slide here, which really lays out the company structure broken down into two key focal points. So development and delivery. Under the development banner, they've got research and technology. So the research portion is really focused on obviously researching and developing a number of these different substances or drugs that can be used to treat substance and behavioral addiction. So the first one listed is ketamine. This substance is the one they're farthest along with in terms of clinical trials. This is really their go-to-market product at this point in time. This is going to assist psychotherapy for substance and behavioral addiction. So we've talked about ketamine injection and ketamine-assisted treatments in some of our other videos as a very effective way or alternative way to treat some of these disorders. Next up is MDMA, which is really focused on assisted psychotherapy specifically for alcohol use disorder. And then finally, next generation psychedelic drugs and therapies to further treat various forms of addiction. Now, under the technology banner, they're enabling technologies to improve the effectiveness of psychedelics in treating addiction. So these two really go hand in hand here, you guys. And again, based on the other companies we've looked at on the channel, I feel like Awakn really is miles ahead in terms of their clinical trials. And we've actually got some really nice slides towards the end of the presentation that shows the different phases of clinical trials for some of these competitors in this space, along with their various market caps. So looking forward to that chart again towards the end of the video here. Now under the delivery focal point here, there's three subcategories. So they've got their clinics, which again are really going to be focused on treating addiction and other mental health conditions. These are brick and mortar locations. They've already got two in operation, so one in Norway, one in the United Kingdom. And as we just saw on that Q3 financial statement, they've already started to generate some revenue for the business. Now the second point here is really focused on partnerships, so scaling the impact and the reach of Awakn through licensing partnerships. This is really focused on generating revenue into 2022, so this year, and then looking out a little bit further here. So I'd call this maybe the midterm horizon, 2025. They're focusing on therapeutic commercialization. So what that means is once marketing authorization has been secured for the therapies and the drugs that are currently undergoing testing, we will then commercialize them by scaling through traditional pharmaceutical channels. So again, we talked about multiple different revenue streams here. I mentioned in the intro that this business looks poised for big growth over the next couple of years. And this is exactly why I said that statement, you guys, because they've got a structure and plan in place to continue to drive additional streams of revenue for the next 3, 4, 5 years. So now that we understand what the team at Awakn is all about, the mission behind the company, the focus on addiction and mental health disorders, I wanted to really take a step back and look at addiction in terms of why this is such a big problem for the world. So what is addiction is the first question that really comes to mind. When I think about addiction, my mind really goes to alcohol addiction, but there really are a number of other forms, and there's a really cool interactive chart that we're going to look at on the next slide here that talks about some of these different forms of addiction. So addiction is currently a poorly treated chronic medical disease involving complex interactions among brain circuits, genetics, and the person's environment, along with that individual's life experiences. People with addiction use substances or engage in various behaviors that become compulsive and often continue despite having harmful consequences on that person. Now, the reason why Awakn has really chosen to focus on addiction as their primary outcome here is addiction is currently one of the biggest unmet medical needs on a global scale. So with substance and behavioral addictions affecting more and more people. They're now at a spot where a significant portion of the global adult population is battling some sort of addiction challenges. And we've really talked about this on a number of other presentations on the channel. The current forms of treatment really are unsuccessful. A lot of people relapse, and a lot of people simply just don't seek treatment because they don't believe it's going to work. So the market opportunity here, or the total addressable market, they estimate the global substance addiction treatment industry to be valued at about $18 billion per year in 2019, and they're expecting or forecasting that to increase to about $32 billion per year by 2027. So the market opportunity itself has just about doubled over an 8-year period. And keep in mind, this is only substance addiction treatment. That doesn't even scratch the surface or touch on behavioral addiction. Now this is the graph or the chart that I mentioned on the previous slide. So you can see they've broken it down into the two categories, substance addiction and behavioral addiction. So obviously alcohol use disorder is probably the one that comes to mind for most people, including myself. It's estimated that 5% of the global adult population, or roughly 390 million individuals, actually struggle with alcohol disorder. So that's a huge addressable market in its own, and that's just one substance, not again even mentioning or touching on the behavioral side of things. Now, in addition to alcohol, tobacco use or smoking really impacts about 23% or 1 in 4 adults across the world. So that's about 1.35 billion people, or about 1,346 million adult individuals. Now, in addition to both of those, alcohol and tobacco, which were probably considered more mainstream substances or disorders, you've probably heard about the opioid war going on here in North America. So opioid addiction actually represents about 0.5% or 0.5% of the global adult population, which represents about 39 million adults. And this one is definitely on the rise, and we've really seen numbers start to spike as a result of the pandemic situation. Now, on top of the substance side of things, again, there's behavioral addiction. So this is really focused on things like gambling, sexual behavior, internet gaming, and binge eating. And you can see the numbers on this side of the chart as well, you guys, range from the tens to hundreds of millions of people on a global scale. So if you add up all of these numbers, we're talking billions and billions of people that struggle with some sort of addiction. And that's really the opportunity or the challenge that Awakn is trying to solve. And that's exactly what this slide here starts to talk about. So the approach or the solution that Awakn has really put forward here is addressing addiction, regardless of which type of addiction, with new proprietary combined therapeutics. So we're talking about drugs and therapies that approach the treatment of addiction in a radically different way than before. So I mentioned in the intro that Awakn has really tried to differentiate themselves from the competitors in this space, and this is exactly what they're trying to do differently. So based on new research, Awakn's drugs will target the brain circuits that actually drive and are responsible for addiction through multiple receptors rather than using a single drug receptor. These circuits control the behavioral drivers of addiction, and by focusing on the entire circuit mechanism itself rather than isolated or single receptors, Awakn's approach has the potential to be effective in treating both substance and behavioral addictions. This disruption also allows the individual to escape from the repetitive addictive behaviors and thoughts, and in doing so engage with this psychotherapeutic process to enable lasting and positive change. And we're actually going to take a look at how they use medicine and therapy in conjunction to really rewire or remap how these circuits in the brain work. And you can see a diagram here really calling out some of the key components within our brain that are responsible for substance and behavioral addiction. And this is really one of the reasons I love covering companies like this on the channel, because not only are you learning about a potential financial investment opportunity, but I also learn a ton about human psychology, the brain, the body, healthy living. So it's really interesting for me to go through these decks. And that's why I actually wanted to spend some time on the solution that Awakn has put forward and how this actually changes the chemistry in the brain. So this is what it looks like, a balanced brain state with no addiction. So this is an optimal brain state here, you guys. Cognitive control, or PFC controls, are actually making the final decisions in our minds. So you can see cognitive control here is kind of the aqua blue color. The arrow is much larger than any of these other areas of the brain. And cognitive control is really the driving factor or motivation behind individual decision making. So that's really what's telling individuals whether they should or should not do something, whether that's a substance or a behavior. And that's giving them that no-go signal. Now you can see there's other components of the brain here, so learning and memory, and also your reward and pleasure center. And you can see those still do impact motivation and decision making, but to a much smaller scale than that cognitive control center. Now in an addicted brain here, you can see excessive drives from the memory center and reward pleasure circuits actually depress the amount of influence the cognitive control center has on that decision-making process. And you can see that that line now, rather than being a big strong arrow, is actually a broken or fragmented arrow with the main decision-making component coming from that reward and pleasure center of the brain. And that's actually telling people who struggle with addiction to go for it and have that next smoke, have that next drink, make that next bet, or whatever the case is, you guys. You can see that the circuit in the brain is not operating as it's supposed to in a brain with no addiction. Now where Awakn comes in is they use a combination, as we just talked about, of drugs, as you can see here, and therapy to really silence some of these brain pathways or circuits to prevent unwanted pressure on the decision-making process. And then they focus on therapy to really regain control or give back control to the cognitive center of the brain. And you can see they've now restored that big aqua green or blue arrow that's really driving the decision-making process for that individual. And again, now they've got the ability to say no or no-go to whatever addiction they may be struggling with. So really, again, it's this combination of drugs and therapy focusing on multiple different circuits within the brain that are really starting to see very lucrative results for the team at Awakn. Now with that being said, I wanted to shift gears here, you guys, and focus on the actual therapeutic development cycle here or strategy that Awakn has, and talk about some of the near-term, medium-term, and long-term expectations from this company. So near-term, again, front and center is ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. This is going to be for the substance and behavioral addictions. Over the medium term is MDMA, and the long term are those NCEs or new chemical entities. And this slide here actually shows their clinical pipeline. So you can see alcohol use disorder is the one that the company's really focused on as their first use case. And the ketamine compound or ketamine testing is all the way in phase 2B clinical trials. MDMA is right behind in phase 2A, and you can see the new chemical entities are in the early discovery phase. Now this slide is really cool because it shows the various levels of clinical trials. So there's early discovery, there's clinical development, there's phase 1, phase 2A, phase 2B, and phase 3. So you can really get a good feel for the various different disorders or addictions the team at Awakn has really focused on and where they're at in terms of each one of those addictions and the various compounds they're looking at to treat that specific addiction or disorder. And with that being said, I wanted to double click on the ketamine research program itself, again, because this is the one that's the furthest along or furthest progressed for this company. They've already acquired the assets that are needed for these clinical trials. They've got planned future activity, so this really focuses on transitioning from those phase 2B clinical trials into the pivotal phase 3 trial. The current activity here, so after these phase 2B results are published, Awakn will be the only company in the world delivering an evidence-backed ketamine-assisted psychotherapy for alcohol use disorder. Again, differentiating them or separating them from the rest of the competition in this space. They're really first to market with this type of treatment, and Awakn has started recruitment already for the world's first study into ketamine as a treatment for gambling disorder as well. And as we saw on that total addressable slide, alcohol use affects nearly 5% of the global adult population. Only 16% of people actually seek treatment, and 75% of those people who seek treatment actually relapse within 12 months. So very low effectiveness for the existing or current treatments, and a lot of people simply don't even bother because they don't feel like the treatment is going to work. Now, gambling disorder again affects a huge number of adults around the world. In the US alone, it represents about 10 million adults. So it really does make sense why the team at Awakn has focused on alcohol and gambling as number 1 and 2 priorities for the company, because there's very little available for people who are currently struggling with these addictions or disorders. So now that we have a good understanding of the development cycle at Awakn, we're going to look at the other key focal point for the company, which is really the delivery or the go-to-market strategy, again focused around the brick and mortar clinics. So as of 2021, they had 2 clinics currently open, again in Oslo, Norway, and in the United Kingdom. Moving into 2022, they've got a number of new locations that are on the roadmap, so places like Manchester, Birmingham, Dublin, so expanding into Ireland. And then moving out to 2023 and beyond, they're looking to really expand across Europe, so countries like Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Belgium. And based on that aggressive growth plan across Europe, the company is actually targeting 20 clinics by the end of 2024 with an average of 6 treatment rooms per clinic. So this is a look at what the clinics will ultimately look like, you guys. Very fresh, relaxing, and inviting. Treatment programs are going to cost between 6,000 to 7,500 euros. Each treatment program is going to consist of 3 to 4 ketamine sessions and 8 therapy and integration sessions. So again, the mix of drugs and therapy. And Awakn plans to deliver approximately 8 patient treatment programs per treatment room per month. So if you do the math here, 6 treatment rooms per clinic, $6,000 per treatment, 8 patient treatments per room per month, you're actually looking at an average revenue per year from each clinic or each location of about 4 million euros. And based on this 20 clinic projection or target, you're looking at about 80 million euros per year from the brick and mortar clinics alone. And now that we're starting to talk about some of the numbers, I thought it was really fitting to stack rank Awakn compared to some of the other competitors in this space. So a few of these we've talked about on the channel, MindMed, for example, Cybin, Field Trip Health. So you can really see or get a good feel for how far Awakn is in terms of their clinical trials compared to some of these other competitors on this slide. So again, Awakn is really focused on addiction. Some of these other companies are looking to resolve problems related to anxiety, depression, eating disorders, PTSD, whatever the case is. Addiction is really the focal point for Awakn, and you can see they are the furthest along in any of these categories. So again, phase 2B clinical trials. The only company that has more advanced clinical trials is actually MAPS, and they're focused on the PTSD space, so really not a direct competitor to Awakn. And this slide here really takes that graph one step further. So it again compares the various different stages of clinical trial up on the top here with the various different companies. And you can see Awakn Life Sciences miles ahead of the competition here, you guys. But if you look at the actual market cap listed here as $81 million Canadian, they represent a fraction of these other companies. So Field Trip Health, for example, another one we've talked about on the channel, they're in preclinical trials and they're fetching a market cap of almost $500 million. MindMed, which is one of the bigger players in this space, they're in phase 2A clinical trials. Their market cap is nearing $1.5 billion. So when you talk about Awakn and how far they are really in this development cycle, the fact that their market cap is under $100 million Canadian definitely does make them a very attractive potential investment in my personal opinion. And with that being said, I thought this was a really fitting way to end out today's video, you guys, just really with a recap of some of the reasons you may want to take a closer look at Awakn and put this one on your radar or on your watch list for the year 2022. So multiple revenue streams that they're looking to scale. So again, the clinics 2021, the partnerships this year, and the therapeutic commercialization moving forward into 2025. They've got the revolutionary approach, so really focused on targeting those brain circuits rather than individual receptor sites, using a combination of therapy and drug treatments. The team, we didn't really spend a lot of time on the management team here, you guys. They've got an all-star staff, all-star scientific group here backing the company. We're going to look at that probably in our next update or next video on Awakn. They're focused on areas of the market that impact or affect a huge portion of the adult population. And again, really focused on addiction, whether that be substance or behavioral. the IP portfolio, so a number of patents. That's really what's allowed them to get so far along in that clinical journey. And they've been recognized as global leaders in the research field of psychedelic treatments for addiction. So again, this really goes closely with the leadership team, which we're going to cover at a future date. So for those reasons, you guys, I would definitely recommend you take a look at Awakn if you're looking for exposure into the psychedelic treatment or psychedelic wellness space. Again, we've talked about a number of these on the channel, but I definitely think this one has a lot going for them in terms of where they're at in the development cycle, their roadmap, their addressable market, and the section of this market being addiction that they've chosen to focus on. And with that being said, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts in the comment section below on what you think of Awakn, how they stack up to some of the competitors in this space. If you're not already subscribed, McNallie Money, feel free to do so. And with that being said, if you're still watching the video at this point, hopefully you found some value, so make sure you hit the like button on your way out. That's all for now, you guys. Thanks for watching, and have a great rest of your day.